Thanks so much, everybody, for coming tonight. It's very clear that in London there's a lot to do, a lot of options, so kudos to you for taking out an hour for personal growth. As I guess you all know, my name is Eitan, and we have a wonderful program tonight. As you know, it's now exactly 1 month into the year, into the new year, the Gregorian New Year. So regardless of which New Year you celebrate in your tradition, I know we all have the same problems of sticking to our goals and our commitments for the new year. And so why not learn from some of the writings and teachings from thousands of years in the various religious traditions and also from secular literature and from science. So tonight we are very honored to have scholars from the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions who will share with us teachings from their own traditions. And also we have a researcher who focuses on English literature who will share with us from some wisdom from that as well. And we are very, very lucky to have someone who actually does research on this very topic of sticking to our New Year's resolutions and our goals and things like that. So it's not like each one is going to present the Jewish view or the Islamic view or whatever. It's just they're just going to be sharing teachings from their respective areas of expertise, and hopefully, we'll hear a lot of ideas tonight, and maybe each of us will hear one or two ideas that will be helpful to our own situation. So I thought the first half hour each will have maybe each presenter will talk for like 5 minutes each or so, and then in the second half we'll have more of a discussion. So, without any further ado, we are very honored to have Dr. Amina Inloes, scholar of Islamic studies, and will teach us some Islamic wisdom on this topic.
Thank you very much. Well, I have the privilege of doing something I've never done before in my life, and that is offering an Islamic perspective on keeping New Year's resolutions. So when I was given this topic, I gave it some thought, and I realized that it really fits into a genre of something I like to explore in general, and that is how various forms of wisdom we do have in some of our ancient texts really do model a lot of advice we read nowadays on blogs and we hear on TEDx talks and so forth. And I think this simply comes down to, as some of us were saying a bit before, that people really have been dealing with the same problems for thousands of years and human nature hasn't changed. And there have been any number of solutions put forward to various human challenges throughout history. And I'm of the view that in the modern era, perhaps, not everywhere necessarily, but we do tend to sometimes take a dim view of what's come before us and only look at things and ideas that come up nowadays. Not everyone, but in general. And I think we do lose a lot by doing that. So I'm going to offer some thoughts from what is in Islamic texts. Basically, the challenge of committing to making a change in life and following through with it is something that most people struggle with. This is a universal issue. Some pieces of advice I found in Islamic scriptural sources, or in Islamic in general, is first of all something that is repeated a lot in Islamic tradition. And this is from a theistic perspective, but the saying is that God loves the little that you do regularly and not the big thing that you do once. This is used both in an ethical and in a spiritual context in the Islamic tradition. But for example, let's say someone wishes to become more charitable. Giving a large amount of charity at one time is good, obviously, but it's better if they do it bit by bit, and not only because that creates a sort of lasting habit in the person, and not only are they changing the world, they're also changing themselves in that way. And I think that's applicable to many of the changes we make in life. Now, there are certain things that you may wish to do all at once, but many times it is easier to do things step by step on a regular and consistent basis until it becomes part of you. So that's one piece of advice that I felt was applicable to this question. I did come across a narration, Islamic narration, it's called a hadith, which mentioned that yourself will incline towards the things you make it love to do. Now, I started to think about that because it is, the verb form that's in Arabic is to make yourself love to do something. And I connected that with the idea that some people have, and that is if you want to make some sort of change in your life that's difficult, then basically do some sort of Pavlovian training and associate it with some sort of immediate reward. So the idea is when you do something, it's associated with something enjoyable and it reinforces whatever habit you wish to instill inside of yourself. And I found it interesting that this is a 7th century text, which to me seemed to be getting at the same idea. So that's advice number 2 I picked up. So far we have making little changes in many circumstances, not every circumstance in life, and trying to get yourself accustomed to loving certain things you like to do to help keep them on. Now, for the length of time it takes to change. Within the Islamic tradition, again, there's a big emphasis on the concept of 40 days. That if you'd like to do something, or conversely, if you're picking up a bad habit, it takes 40 days to get instilled in you. So one of the things you see a lot with respect to the subject of spiritual improvement is instead of necessarily committing to doing something new for your entire life, you're advised to commit to 40 days or to abstain from something like, I don't know, thinking evil thoughts or gossiping or whatever for 40 days. And the idea is that at the end of the 40 days, your new habit will become a part of you. So that's the length of time. Now, I did do a bit of research, and I did find a number of New Year's resolutions do actually fail before 40 days. But nonetheless, the idea is if you can keep it going for that length of time, then it is likely to become a long-term change. Another important thing is accountability. Now, this is something, again, that comes up a lot in Islamic ethics. It's not at all limited to Islam, but there is religious encouragement of spending a bit of time at night every day, basically being self-accountable, taking stock of your day, especially if you have certain goals or certain concerns in mind. Again, this is usually discussed in a spiritual or ethical perspective, which may in fact encompass people's New Year's resolutions. And that sort of self-accountability will help you hold to whatever you have in mind that you would like to do. And I think that's also another very useful thing for making life changes, because it does force you to stay more accountable to what you want to do. Now, of course, the next piece of advice I found also in a 7th century source. This is from the 4th Khalifa Caliph, or successor after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Of course, it may not necessarily be applicable if you're resolving to stop something, but it's nonetheless good advice. And that is basically the best way to stop doing something is not to start doing it in the first place. And this is actually something that comes up in the Islamic tradition a lot too, with respect to a lot of different things. The particular way this story came about is with respect to one time when this person was offered some sort of very fancy sweet that he'd never had before, and he said, no thank you. And they said, why? It's wonderful, don't you like it? And he said, my soul has not yet become accustomed to this, and I don't wish to become accustomed to something that I would then want. So in other words, I'm going to stop it before it starts. I think that's good advice for us, myself included, no matter where we are in life, whether we're literally at the point where we've never done something that could become addictive or difficult to drop or harmful, or maybe we've given up something. Most of us have given up various things. And you know that if you just stay away from it, you're not going to have that temptation, you're not going to have to go through the difficulty of stopping again. That's a good thing to keep in mind when you're at that point that you might start up whatever you're trying to get rid of. So that's useful for resolutions to stop doing things. And lastly, the Islamic tradition, of course, is heavily theistic, and the main piece of advice given for anything really is to ask God for help, and He will help you. So that, in short, is an Islamic perspective on keeping New Year's resolutions. I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentations, and thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Inloes. I've got to mention that Dr. Inloes has just finished her PhD and also is a lecturer at the Islamic College in London. So we're very honored to have her. So next we are going to hear from Dr. Beci, who is a research fellow at UCL in the English department. And we're going to hear about wisdom from English literature on this topic.
I'm the this talk is Order and Novelty, and I hope the meaning will come out as I read. The 20th century poet W.H. Auden is a useful person to think about in the context of New Year's resolutions, because he spent much of his early poetry philosophizing about the act of making choices, both romantic and political, and the regrets that inevitably followed. Writing about Hitler and other arch manipulators in a poem of 1934, he urged his readers, "Yours is the choice, to move as a money bug or a cancer, or straight as a dove," while in 1937, during a particularly bloodthirsty phase of the Spanish Civil War, he wrote in despair about his own and other people's loss of faith in the capacity of violence to solve injustice. The stars are dead, the animals will not look, we're left alone with our day, and the time is short, and history to the defeated may say alas, but cannot help or pardon. One of the ideas that preoccupies Auden's early poetry is that we're stuck with the choices we make, because history, being secular, lacks the power to forgive us for them. When we make mistakes, there is no God that we can call upon to wipe them out. Making choices is like writing in indelible ink. New Year's resolutions aren't binding in the way that a political or romantic commitment might be, so they're immune to the kind of pressure and panic that Auden associates with the word choice. If choice in Auden is like a permanent tattoo, New Year's resolutions are like fake tattoos, in that we use them to symbolize choices we simply entertain the thought of making permanent. There's a playfulness built into the act of making New Year's resolutions that's completely absent from Auden's idea of commitment. On the other hand, both resolutions and permanent commitments could be said to share the fundamental assumption that an adjustment in our personal behaviour may influence not only our personal futures, but the futures of the people with whom we share our lives. You might say that there's something democratic about New Year's resolutions because they assume that an individual's actions may potentially make a difference to the world. Auden certainly thought that making a responsible decision about whether to fight in the Spanish Civil War, or whether to reject Hitler, or whether to join the Communist Party, or whether to fall in love, could make a difference in the way history played out. And if I tell myself that this year I'm going to stop eating meat or stop using plastic bags, part of me sees myself as making an impact, albeit a tiny granular impact, on the world's ecosystem. I want to propose here that we should see our New Year's resolutions both as an opportunity to change the world and as an opportunity to engage some of our democratic potential. There are obvious advantages to thinking of ourselves as democratic creatures. That is, creatures who influence the world. But the one I want to focus on briefly in concluding this talk has to do with novelty. In the spring of 1941, Auden wrote a poem about the death of the novelist Henry James, in which he summed up the lives of the people buried in the graveyard with James as a series of errors. Auden writes that the gravestones stand here in innocent stillness, each marking the spot where one more series of errors lost its uniqueness and novelty came to an end. It is worth pointing out here that when Auden used the word error, he didn't just mean mistake, but wander or ramble. That is, he was channeling the Latin meaning of the verb to err. The trick of channeling the origins of words is an important part of his poetic method. Its effect, in this instance, is to suggest that the lives of the people buried alongside James are full of experimental choices, metaphorical wanderings. And his argument is that when the occupants of the graves in this graveyard stopped making choices, they lost their capacity for uniqueness and novelty. They died in a sense that was more than physical. For Auden, there was something permanently old about the dead, whereas it seemed to him that the living kept themselves unique and new by making choices. If Auden were here, I think he would say that the opportunity to make choices, whether playful or serious, is a luxury of being alive, and in a way that the act of making choices keeps us alive and even brings us to life.
Coming up next, we have Dr. Andrew Perryman. Is that right? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed. As I was saying, we have. We're very honored to have all the way from the University of Surrey, Katy Kennedy, who is a psychology researcher, a PhD candidate in psychology, who is going to share with us her research and the research that she's gathered on some of the science around what works and what doesn't work when it comes to this topic.
So, from Auden to Bridget Jones. Stop smoking, stop drinking, find inner poise. Go to gym 3 times a week. Don't flirt with boss. Reduce thighs. Learn to love thighs. Forget about thighs. Stop making lists. So I think that sums up a lot of the problems that we have with New Year's resolutions. It's just a laundry list of things that you think are wrong with you, that it'd be nice to improve, but whether they're just anemic intentions and things that you like to do rather than things you really want to do and really committed to do is another question. So I think that we don't take New Year's resolutions very seriously, and I think you're right there that maybe we ought to take them more seriously, because actually there is some research, and I would be really interested to know whether it's cross-cultural, because most of the research has been done in the US on the fresh start effect. So one study looked at Google searches, a goal adherence website, and university gym attendance. So they looked at people's health-seeking behaviour and also their actual behaviour. And they found a really startling fresh start effect, mainly in January, so New Year's resolutions. But they also found people were more likely to seek out health information and to act on that information on Mondays. So searches for quit smoking peak on Mondays. They go down Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays. Sundays, there's a little blip, Sunday night. And that applies to dieting as well. So this is really interesting, I think. And they also found the same effect for after holidays, after going on vacation. They also found it for after university holidays and school holidays. And after things like Easter and after birthdays, apart from 21st birthdays, which might be related to US drinking laws, I think. So it would actually be fascinating to go across and maybe see Muslims, maybe there's some sort of effect after Eid, I don't know. It would be really interesting to know whether different faiths actually affect the sort of, they're obviously not New Year's resolutions, or maybe they are if we have a different year, but that would be really interesting to research, I think. I couldn't find anything on that. So going back to research about New Year's resolutions, Ethan asked for only a 5-minute talk, probably won't even be that long. There's not much. There's about 3 studies, which is crazy, because a lot of people make resolutions. So according to a YouGov study in 2013, let me find the number. So 28% of people who made New Year's resolutions aimed for more physical activity, and about 30% of people polled made a New Year's resolution. And that's a huge number of people, isn't it? So why don't we take this seriously? Why is there no research on it? It doesn't make sense. So there is a study in 1972, really recent. It's actually a really good study. And they found, so comparing the YouGov study, which is just like a little survey, it wasn't really proper research, with the 1972 study, actually about the same number of people made New Year's resolutions, which I think is quite interesting. But the format of the resolutions was quite different. So in 1972, people didn't seem to make New Year's resolutions to exercise, and that's my area of interest. So I was really fascinated by this. 40 years ago, people didn't say, I want to be more active. And now, 25% of people who make resolutions say, I want to be more active. So there seems to be a real shift, and actually, if you look at the research in 1989 and 2002, again, it seems to be creeping up, and there does seem to be a shift in the kind of resolutions that people make. So, in terms of the research looking at long-term behaviour, it doesn't seem very realistic. So, apparently, after 15 weeks in 1972, only 25% of people had broken their New Year's resolutions. It doesn't seem very likely, but there's probably all kinds of problems with that. In 1986, they found something similar actually. After 6 months, 40% of people said they kept their resolutions, which, yeah, it doesn't seem very believable, does it? But, you don't know. They did a follow-up 2 years later. This is actually quite interesting, and they found that there was a success rate after 2 years of 19%. And there was no contact between the researchers and the people who made the resolutions between 6 months and 2 years. So actually that's not too bad, I don't think. So maybe we ought to take New Year's resolutions more seriously. Who knows? There was another study in 2002, this is a really good one, because they looked at people who made resolutions versus people who didn't make resolutions. And what they did is they followed them up at 1, 2, 3 and 4 weeks, and 3 months and 6 months. And they found that at 6 months, 46% of resolvers were successful, which is quite a lot of people. And of the non-resolvers, 4% were successful. So if you don't make a New Year's resolution, you're definitely not going to keep it.
Don't understand that, sorry.
So what they did is that they asked people if they were going to make a New Year's resolution, or whether they weren't going to make a New Year's resolution, and then asked them roughly kind of what sort of thing it would be. And the people who said, well, I want to be more active, or I want to stop smoking, but I'm not going to make a New Year's resolution to do that. That's
a resolution, isn't it?
Well, no. But they said they weren't going to make a resolution, but they said, if you were going to make a resolution, what would it be? And they said, oh, I'd think about stopping smoking, sort of thing. So they didn't make a resolution.
A commitment.
Yeah. So they didn't make that commitment to form a goal, but they. Yes, I agree. It's difficult. But what they were trying to do was work out whether actually making a resolution had a big impact on your then behaviour after that, and what they seemed to find was that it did. So there's not much research on New Year's resolutions. Like 3 or 4 studies is crazy. So there's a real gap in the market. So I'm doing a New Year's resolution study on walking, and I'm following people for 6 months, and I'm making them download an app to log their walks, and they make a New Year's resolution to walk more, and that could be whatever they like, and then I'm going to follow them up at 6 months and see how successful they've been. So it should be quite interesting. So it's really difficult to recruit people in a really short period of time when there's Christmas in the middle as well, I have to say. That might be one reason why there's not much research into the area, because our university terms kind of, don't really coincide very well with trying to get people to participate in studies. So there's almost no research on New Year's resolutions, but there's quite a lot of research into goals and goal setting and strategies and so on. So I could probably spend all night talking about that, but I'm not going to, because we have other people to talk to. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katy. And next we are very honoured to have Dr. Andrew Perryman. No, you're not?
No, I'm honoured.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it right to sit down?
No, by all means.
Standing up.
Yeah, so Dr. Perryman is a prolific writer and author, even though he'll deny it, in New Testament theology, and he has taught at London School of Theology and St. How do you pronounce it? Melitius?
St. John's? What?
Melitius?
Mellitus, yeah.
Alright, without any further ado, Dr. Perrin.
Yeah, I did say not prolific, but okay, well, I mean, the research is much more positive than I'd come across, because I was seeing figures of about a sort of 10% success rate in most cases. So maybe I got that wrong. I did do a little bit of research at church this morning, which you may want to take into account at some point. I did talk to Brian, and he made a New Year's. He did the history of homelessness and alcoholism and so on. For 2 years ago, he made a resolution to stop drinking alcohol, and for 2 years now, he's not been drinking alcohol, and he's very pleased with that. So that's on the sort of research basis. That's 100%. 1 out of 1. But his trick was apparently to keep a large bottle of cider in the kitchen, because that would remind him not to drink it. Now, it seems to me that's counterintuitive. Most people, you get a bottle of wine or a can of beer in the kitchen, that would remind you that you haven't been drinking and it's really time you did. But it seemed to work for him anyway. So the fact that this was a chap at church this morning, that's a little bit of sort of Christian research on the topic. But my initial reaction when I was asked about this is I really I've got a little interest in the whole thing of New Year's resolutions, to be honest, and I think I probably some years ago just gave up trying because it never seemed to work. I'd never had a conversation with anyone about a New Year's resolution other than in early January, which seems to sort of point to me the fact that it's simply a sort of just a very short-term experience. But when you sort of started thinking about it, and trying to sort of look into the theological, from the perspective of the Christian tradition, what sort of theological perspective can we have on this? And I started looking back a bit, and yes, okay, and I can see now that actually this isn't such a modern phenomenon as I thought it was, and apparently the ancient Babylonians would make New Year commitments to give back what they had borrowed from people, or pay back debts, and the Romans would make certain resolutions or commitments to Janus, the god Janus, as in the god of January, at the beginning of the year. So that sort of piqued my interest a little bit. Within the Christian tradition, it's much harder to find sort of serious sort of Christian practices that tying in with New Year's resolutions. But apparently the Moravians in Czechoslovakia in the 18th century had what they called night watches, the night watch service on New Year's Eve. That was a religious service at which they would make resolutions for the coming year, and the Methodists in this country picked up on that. John Wesley was very enthusiastic about it. And I think because the Methodists saw it as a sort of a pious alternative to the drunken revelry that went on otherwise. But it's one of the few examples that I could find of the church. I'm sure there are others, but with the limited sort of scope of research that I did, there doesn't seem to be very much of the church sort of sanctifying the process of making New Year's resolutions, and quite possibly because the church is as cynical about the whole thing as I am. But actually, when you sort of stop and think about it, there's an underlying sort of fault line in Christian thinking that has been there from a very early stage that I think may explain why Christians in the church are sort of very ambivalent. They're very much in two minds about making resolutions. It goes back to a British monk called Pelagius, who was teaching in Rome in the sort of late 4th, early 5th century, and he reacted against the view of Augustine that everything is by grace. So Augustine has sort of had this reputation throughout church history of being the theologian who established the fact that we don't do anything of our own action, our own volition, our own intention, our own will. Everything that we do as Christians is by grace. I think that Pelagius sort of saw some of the moral laxity in the church in Rome, and his argument was, look, you simply need to do what is right. So it was a call, not to sort of throw everything on grace, but to actually get up and do something about it, to do the right thing. And so you get this tension within Christian thinking from that point on between Augustine, who places the emphasis on what God does, and everything is a gift of grace through Jesus, and Pelagius, who was, there have been various sort of permutations of his thinking, but basically Pelagius insisting, no, you have the capacity to make the right decision to do something and hold to it. And I think probably what we've had to do in the church is try and sort of hold those two ideas in tension. But the controversy showed up at various, has showed up and continues to show up, most notably at the time of the Reformation, where the medieval Catholic Church was accused by people like Martin Luther of encouraging people to earn their salvation by various types of work, moral works, but also religious works of all sorts of different kinds. So Luther's reaction against that was, no, salvation is a gift of grace, and the whole life of faith is fundamentally a gift of grace. So that seemed to me to be, perhaps from the Christian perspective, a major part of the reason why we're in two minds about making New Year's resolutions, because we're not sure we're supposed to. Because there's something in us that is constantly saying, well, actually Augustine said, or Luther said, or evangelicals and people in that tradition say today, no, everything is a gift to us through Jesus, and it's not for you to achieve by your own merit, will, intention, and so on. So that's probably... it's not. I loved what you said because it was also practical, and I thought, I haven't got anything like that. All I've got is this sort of theological dilemma that sort of undermined my commitment to actually get up and go and do something good. So apologies.
Great. That's why we want the variety of content and approaches. So thanks so much, Dr. Perryman. That's great. And last but not least is Dr. Elliott Karstadt. Did I say that right, Karstadt? And Dr. Karstadt is a PhD in intellectual history and also a student rabbi at Leo Baeck College. And he'll share some wisdom from Jewish teachings on this topic.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. So the first thing I thought of when I was invited was that in Jewish tradition there are at least 4 New Years. It says in the Mishnah, which is a book that was probably completed around 200 of the Common Era, it says that there are 4 New Years. There's the New Year that starts in the spring, around about the Jewish version of Passover. One that begins in the autumn, when we're supposed to do kind of reflection and soul searching and atonement. There's a New Year for kings, and there's a New Year for trees, which just went by. And maybe a lesson that we can draw from that is that actually we should take multiple opportunities during the year to make resolutions and not just focus on one particular date. So we have 4 different opportunities, maybe 5 now that we've got the secular New Year to go with as well. So I just thought there were 2 texts I wanted to look at that might draw 3 kind of conclusions. When I was preparing for today, I looked at 2 particular texts. One is from the Talmud, which is a kind of commentary on the Mishnah, and it's basically written between about 200 and about 600 of the Common Era, and it's basically made up of lots of different statements by different rabbis, and it's all organised into lots of different, what are called tractates, each one on a particular subject. And the one I looked at was a tractate of the Talmud called Moed Katan, which is about the days in between festivals. So we have 2 festivals that are 8 days long. One is Sukkot and the other one is Passover. And at the beginning we have 2 days of festival in which we abstain from work and we go to synagogue and we sing very special psalms. And then we have 5 days of going back to work, and then we have another day at the end in which we sing the psalms and don't work. And it's in those 5 days that this particular tractate is concerned with what we do on those 5 days. And it has one very particular line, which I kind of was reading yesterday, and it goes like this. Rabbi Eli, who's one of the rabbis who was making the statement, said, if the Yetzer Hara, begins to overtake you, and the Yetzer Hara is the evil inclination. If you start to think that, I'm going to have that chocolate bar, or I'm going to stay in bed this morning, I'm not going to go for a run, that's the evil inclination. To be contrasted with the Yetzer Tov, which is the good inclination, which would be to have the banana or get out of bed and go for a run. He says if the evil inclination starts to overcome you, if you feel yourself starting to be overcome by this evil inclination, then what should you do? You should put on black clothes, put on a black cloak, go somewhere where no one knows who you are, do what you want to do, and don't do it what you're ashamed of doing in public. Now, this suggested kind of two potential readings for me. One was suggested by later commentators. Later commentators say, actually what it means doesn't mean go and do it. What it really means is ritualize the potential to do bad. So, if you have to put on black clothes, put on your black cloak, go somewhere where nobody knows you, you've got a lot of time to think through what you're about to do and think about the consequences and think about actually putting on the black cloak might be actually a symbol that I'm not doing something that's right. So they say, the commentators say, actually, Rabbi Eli is not saying that you should go and do bad things. He's saying if you ritualize your bad habits, actually you'll kind of stop. You're not going to do it by the time you get there. So that's one way of reading it. The other way of reading it is that actually our tradition made a mistake with this text. That Rabbi Eli is actually not very good advice, and he's just trying to defend somebody in the Talmud. There's a kind of story that precedes this statement in which he's basically trying to defend someone who's not really doing something very good at all. And that's the beauty of Jewish tradition, which is that we have a Talmud which we can kind of argue with. It's full of different, often contradictory statements, and so we shouldn't worry too much about that. So that's one way. That's one particular lesson, which is ritualize your kind of bad habits, or unritualize your bad habits. Ritualize your good habits in a way that means that you're not likely to fall back into the bad ways. So that's one. The other story is one that we read actually in our synagogues last week, and it's from the Torah, from the Hebrew Bible, about Moses after he led the people out of slavery in Egypt into the wilderness. And Moses has a very good, management consultant in his father-in-law, Jethro, who is not an Israelite, but who basically says to Moses, comes across Moses, basically Moses is completely worn out, unable to function as a human being because every single problem that people have, and there are about 600,000 Israelites according to the Torah, according to each one of them is coming to him with their problems and their disagreements with one another. He's having to judge all of them because there's no one else to rule. And Jethro says, you can't operate like this is ridiculous. And so Jethro gives him a whole system of government, a whole system of assistants and law courts and basically civil government, which allows Moses to delegate most of the responsibility to somebody else. And this doesn't mean we should delegate our New Year's resolutions to other people. What it does mean is that we should ask for help. We shouldn't try and do everything ourselves. If we know someone who has quit smoking, or we know someone who has managed to lose some weight, or if someone who has managed to start a new fitness regime, ask them about it. Try and get them to help you. Go on runs together, do things together. Try not to do everything on your own. So those are the three things I think I've got from Jewish tradition, just from a quick glance at a few texts. One is, don't just take one opportunity to make a resolution. Any time is a good time to make a change, whether it's your New Year for trees, or your New Year for kings, or your New Year in January. Second one is, get into the good habits and make sure that if you're going to do something that is out of that habit, that you give yourself time to change your mind. And the third one is, ask for help, don't be a stranger, and good luck. Thank you very much.
so much, Dr. Karstadt. So I thought we could take a few minutes to discuss what we learned. So why don't we... it's good if we just stay here and schmooze. Okay, so first of all, yeah, by all means. Okay, so feel free at any point to jump in. Anyone else? I just took notes on a few things, and I thought I would just follow up. First of all, if did any of I know Katy mentioned that you talked all day about the goal and the research on goals and stuff like that. Did anybody feel like was there any loose ends, any other additional thoughts, or like, oh, I wish I would have included that you wanted to add in?
Well, I found Katy's talk quite mesmerising, to be honest, because it was a whole different perspective, and I got so caught up with it, and I kept thinking of, that's really true, the fundamental difference between, what life is a whole series of choices that you make.
A
whole series of choices. Katy. Not Katy, Beci. A whole series of choices, and it's true, and then you end up in the graveyard as a result of all your choices. And who you end up with means that they've come there through divergent ways to these, from these choices. And yes, there's a finality of life when you can't make your choices anymore, and hopefully those choices will be good ones and extend your life rather than bring you to an early grave.
Yeah. There's a sense in the poem in which the dead envy us, for being able to make choices while they're stuck. They're permanently old.
And I was reminded when you were saying that on Armistice Day, we talk about those who are feeling very young, because they were static when you're dead. People remember that's how you were 57 years old when you died, or 13 or 104 or whatever, but that's, you kind of crystallise at that point.
Yeah, it's an extremely sad poem, and I feel strange about using it, because it should be a positive thing in New Year's resolution, shouldn't it? And I feel like I've let the side down slightly in bringing in such a morbid angle, but I think the morbid angle is implicit in the subject in a way.
I think as well it also relates to some psychology research which shows that if you have an abstract mindset rather than a concrete mindset rather than an abstract mindset, then you're more likely to follow through with your goals. So if you think about yourself in the graveyard when you're reaching for the chocolate cake or this packet of cigarettes, then it might make that choice less likely. So,
and it might make you miserable too.
Taking a longer term view of, will help you make your choice in the immediate, moment.
Yeah.
Do you see it as a sad, depressing kind of way of thinking about it, or I guess kind of like Sarah was saying, like I kind of took it as I'm alive, so therefore I can make choices. It's like a positive way of thinking, like I'm so fortunate that I can still make these choices.
I guess I found moving into that graveyard scene at the end of the piece a sad thing to do, but I think what I took from it was really positive. I like the idea that we're all alive, which means that we can make choices all of the time. We could be making choices now.
Yeah. We did choose to come here.
That's right. Were there anything special?
Could I just say, Dr. Helen, but you talked about the tension between the two monks. So the one that's the actions are by grace of God, Jesus. Does that mean there's no free choice in that? If you take that,
really, it's just trying to find out where you put the emphasis, and there are theological reasons for putting the emphasis in a certain place. Clearly, at the heart of Christian belief is the idea that Jesus died for you. This is not something that you did for yourself. You can't make it any better or worse by anything that you do. So that he's trying to put at the heart of this is this acknowledgement that we live by grace, and yet if you read Augustine, no, clearly there is a response to that, and that somehow I think we've struggled with this. It would be much easier to sort of resolve it one way or the other, but we struggle to hold this tension together, that you receive something from God, and yet that it requires a response. There is this response of gratefulness, there is a response of obedience, and it goes backwards and forwards all the time between receiving and doing, receiving and doing. So I wouldn't sort of, I'm certainly not blaming one or the other in this. I mean, Pelagius was condemned as a heretic, and has been ever since, and that's, I think, is a little unfortunate, because I really do think this is just two sides of the same coin that we're trying to sort of keep in tension all the time.
I just find it hard to see where free choice would fit in. So, if you do some, if you make a bad choice and commit, a sin or do a bad action, if you say that's, you don't have to.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite the same as sort of determinism. I think that's a different type of question, and I'm certainly not. I'm going to think about it a little bit more, but I don't think it's raising quite the same issue. It's more, am I the one who? I mean, the doctrine of original sin lies at the heart of this. Are we sort of born sinful and incapable of doing anything about it? Whether we make New Year's resolutions or not, that was sort of one sort of strong theological position, and the one that prevailed in the church. Or, as Pelagius argued, and as his followers argued, no, we're not sinful or not sinful. We simply learn as we go along to make our own mistakes. That we didn't sort of inherit this all from Adam inescapably. And it has these sort of technical issues relating to infant baptism and so on, which we probably worry about a lot less these days than they used to in the early church. So, yeah, I'm not sure I've answered that terribly well.
Well, it's a bit of an idea.
I'm giving the impression that I know something about it, am I?
Yes.
Good, that's the main thing.
Thank you.
I actually had a comment to make. So I'm quite surprised that you thought that the Christian tradition doesn't have a New Year's resolution sort of thing, because so the fresh start effect that I was talking about was all about, it wasn't just making New Year's resolutions, it was the fact that you forgive your past self. You say, okay, I made those mistakes last year, this is a fresh year, this is what I'm going to do this year. So the fresh start effect to me seems quite a Christian sort of concept.
It is, I agree, and that was part of the Methodist idea. Part of those watch night services was repentance for the year that's passed and acceptance of forgiveness. And yeah, I agree. And maybe I just didn't dig hard enough, but just on my sort of reflecting on it, I didn't see that much attempt. I haven't seen that much attempt to tie that idea, that theology, to the practice of making New Year's resolutions. You may have a very good point, and it may be that the church is missing a trick here.
But if I think of Christianity, I think of it as being constant fresh starts. Like you get baptism, your life's reborn, Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
You forgive those who commit
Yeah.
trespasses against you, and ask God for forgiveness. So maybe it's because it's constant renewal in Christianity. They don't need one time a year. I mean.
Yeah. But I mean, the other side of that is where do you get the determination from to actually go ahead and make a change? It's all very well being able to come back and say, look, I'm sorry, I screwed up again, and finding forgiveness and the ability to make a fresh start. I think the part we've struggled with is the doing the positive thing of going ahead. Am I doing this in my strength, or is this God's strength in me doing this? And I had a verse from Paul. Is it appropriate to read it? It's not very long, but it's sort of. I think it does illustrate, in a way. I mean, it can sound sort of convoluted if you read it carelessly. Praying for the church in Thessalonica, he says, "To this end we always pray for you, that our God may make you worthy of his calling and may fulfill every resolve." So God makes you worthy, God fulfills the resolve for good and every work of faith by his power. You can see it sort of going backwards and forwards all the time between these people resolving to do the right thing in their circumstances, but dependent on God for it. So that's trying to sort of articulate that positive side of it. But I like that idea. Maybe there's much more connection there with the secular perspective on things than I'd appreciated.
Well, one thing that did come to my mind when you were saying that is I wonder if the focus specifically on New Year's resolutions just as a part of mass culture goes with the shift, historically, to human beings determining their own destiny as opposed to a more divine-centered worldview, just with respect to the whole trend of modernity. Because it is, I think we tend to take that, culture of modernity for granted, and maybe it is actually something quite new, culturally speaking. With respect to the fresh start effect, I had a couple of conflicting thoughts, as is often the case. I would wonder, is it a tendency to make resolutions on Mondays and after holidays and so forth? Could possibly be due to the fact that people tend to overindulge in these times and feel like rubbish. So it's like, I'm not going to do this again, and a sort of disciplining effect. But on the other hand, because you mentioned the Islamic tradition, that got me thinking, and I have no evidence, of course, this is just my observation. I do think in terms of life changes, it's usually the month of Ramadan and Hajj is usually when you see people doing it, which would be a sort of fresh start thing, especially because most Muslims, at least, we believe that God writes our destiny once a year at the end of the month of Ramadan, and that does tend to correspond a lot with it's not like necessarily everyone gets together and thinks about what are we going to do differently, although you do get like sermons about that. But that would correspond with that. It's just on a slightly different timetable. So I was thinking about it both ways. Interesting.
So for those of us who are not familiar, so is Hajj right after Ramadan?
No, about like three months afterwards.
So people can take on commitments when they're about to go on the Hajj?
Usually after Hajj or during Hajj. I mean, this is again just like anecdotal evidence. And it could be something positive, something planned, like after I come back from Hajj, I'm going to do this or that. Because there's the idea that you're like a new person or a reformed person, or you shouldn't be the same person. And then sometimes people just come back different. And it may be also in both cases you're taking yourself out of the norm of daily life, whether it's in the month of Ramadan just because your whole life sort of gets shifted around due to fasting and so forth. And Hajj obviously is a physical journey, so it's quite different too. And a lot of things you do are, like the religious prohibitions during Hajj are very different from daily life. So it may have something to do with that too, like being in a completely different mindset or environment. Also may lead to some change.
Yeah, and that corresponds with people, coming back from holiday as well. So
that's a very good point too. I mean obviously Hajj is a religious holiday.
It's not a holiday, but it's to say you're in a different environment, so maybe
that is true. Anyway, with respect to what you were saying also, I think these theological issues probably come up in any religious tradition where we believe God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and so sometimes the lines with respect to what that means for us in our lives, what level of predeterminism is there, what level of free will is there, and so forth, can be blurred. And obviously the Islamic perspective is a bit different in that the Quran basically says salvation comes from belief and good deeds, but in practice in Islamic theology there's a lot more complex views, and I would say if you actually ask people what they personally believe, you get even more complex views. So I think these can be difficult issues for people to resolve.
Yeah. I had a thought, which is possibly the reason why New Year resolutions is more secular than religious, is because religion, especially these religions represented here, tend to be quite prescriptive, telling you what you've got to do, the rule laid down, got to do this, that, the other. So what's the novelty? It's all laid down already. It's all, you're told what to do. Where's the focus on the individual? I mean, it's a bit dangerous if an individual starts deciding, what's morally acceptable, because they have to be restricted in thought in terms of what the theology of their religion says to them. So you don't want to lead to heresy, as we heard with Palladius, because if you start getting too deep in thought, then you might not be the perfect little follower of that religion. I mean, that's just my perspective.
Well, that's true, except I don't know to speak for Judaism, but think it's important to acknowledge that especially in Judaism, that there's a whole spectrum of theology within Judaism, and I can only speak for my theology, but there are lots of other theologies out there. A lot of people might describe themselves as atheist Jews, but who still have a lot of time to listen to stories and texts that religion has to offer, and also morality, and some of the lessons that are kind of within that.
Well, I would say as a Muslim, we do believe the Prophet Muhammad's example is the best example we should follow, but most of us don't do that on a practical level because we're human and we have flaws. So I would say a lot of religious resolutions that come up from ordinary people are just more about how to adhere to certain ideals. So whether it's with respect to religious practice, like, I don't know, maybe reading the Quran more or something, or with respect to, maybe ethics, like not getting angry with people so much, or being more sincere with people or something. I mean, even if you are, quote unquote, a cookie cutter follower, there's still a big sense of where you need to go as a human being to actually fulfill what would be the ideals, so to speak. And with respect to heresy, I don't think anyone ever needs to resolve the heresy. If you start rolling down the hill, if you have an idea you genuinely believe in, you rush towards it. But I don't think people's New Year's resolutions in general really are, with respect to the question of whether to be following a prescribed set of religious teachings or not, they really tend to be, I think for the most part from my experience, quite basic. Exercise, weight, maybe smoking, drinking, and so forth. Really more about these basic aspects of self-improvement that, more or less everyone has to grapple with, whether or not they follow a religion that has, prescribed practical teachings.
Yeah, I was interested in the idea of doing something for 40 days would make it a habit. And I just wondered psychologically whether there has to be something, I feel there has to be something else there as well, otherwise you just look for that target 40 days and say, whew, I'm stopping now. But things do become a habit. I mean, I know, there are certain things I do that pretty boring. Since I had some implants, I think my teeth much better because they cost a fortune. So I think there has to be another motive other than just the 40 days. But I'm not quite sure what it is. And before something becomes very difficult to stop.
Yeah, the 40 days is interesting actually. Yeah, so the research into habit formation shows that actually 40 days. So I think most people say that it's 28 days or something.
Yeah, that's what I've heard shorter.
That it's actually rubbish. So it depends on the individual and it depends on what habit you're trying to form. So if you're trying to form a really complex habit, then it's going to require a lot more time to embed into your life. Whereas if you have a simple habit, then maybe 40 days is enough. Maybe if you want to remember to, floss your teeth every night, then maybe 40 days is enough to make it a habit and to keep going.
Sorry. Yes. Also, it's the intention because I think Lent is how many days?
40 days.
40 days. And people keep that, but they want to keep it for 40 days. Most of them don't say, well, if I do this, hopefully I won't drink or I won't eat sweets after that. Do then this sort of the 41st day, back on whatever they're doing. But I think if you have the intent that, well, maybe if I can keep this for a little while, if I can manage, then
but Lent is precisely not habit forming. You don't do it.
No, I know, but I realise that, but if it was the case that if you just do it for that time,
it's got to have that long-term expectation.
You've got to have the goal,
Yeah, and I think you need to want to for it to be a long-term behaviour change, not just
that's what I'm saying.
No, I agree. But so it depends what the habit is. It depends how complex it is. So something like exercise is extremely difficult because it requires quite a lot of planning. If you want to do an exercise class, you have to book the class, you have to clear your diary, you have to get to the gym, you have to do the class, you have to bring your stuff so you can shower later. There's a lot of steps in there. Whereas there's a very simple habit like flossing your teeth. You just need to make sure you've got floss and it's next to the toothbrush. So maybe you might need to have some extra things in there, but it's essentially quite a simple habit, so you should be quite shorter. But also it depends on the individual and also why they're doing it. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking of one of the most successful programs in breaking one of the most deleterious habits is the 12 steps, Alcoholics Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, where you have to have faith in a higher being, a God, and that seems to be fairly crucial for that program. So the faith element might be very helpful in terms of generating enough perseverance and also doing it for a power outside of you. Because you can forgive yourself. Well, it's just very nice. I don't know, drink a vodka or whatever, but if it's God watching or some other power, then maybe that's what's required. I don't know, I've never been able to keep any New Year resolution. Not for longer than about a week.
Weeks good.
If that, yeah.
Perhaps that has something to do with the type of resolution, though. I mean, I think when people talk about New Year's resolutions, they usually, I'm talking about maybe 80-90% of people talk about ideas they've just come up with on the spur of the moment, casually. Oh, this would be a great idea. I'd love to do that. But they don't really have any blueprint for how they're going to go about doing it. Like if you mentioned a 12-step plan. Well, that's a plan for how to go about doing something. And haven't necessarily thought about what's really important to them or why they're doing it. Like losing weight is very common. Well, how are you going to do it? Why are you going to do it? What are you going to get out of it? That's why I was actually a bit surprised that exercise is so difficult, because it seems like exercise might be a bit easier because you get a lot of reward hits. Like usually people feel good when they exercise, they feel like they look better. So usually once people, there's sort of a positive feedback loop, whereas other resolutions like flossing the teeth, they may not really feel much different and might let it go after a while. But the point is, like, maybe there's other things in life that you really think a lot about seriously and they're very meaningful, and then you go through and maybe research how to do it, and those are maybe the things that you're going to keep up with more regardless of when it's done.
The other factor with the 12-step groups and that type of thing, and which is also true for religions, is the corporate part. So much of what you see in terms of sort of New Year's resolution is an individual on his or her own trying to make a commitment to keep doing something through a year, whereas a 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous, these are corporate, and the importance of that to helping people must be a huge part of it, not just...
Isn't there often like someone, you have like a buddy or someone, you have someone who is, I'm not that familiar with AA, but I think you have someone who has given up a while ago.
Yeah.
Who is like your mentor type thing, I think, isn't
Yeah.
it? So making it social. So that goes back to the Jewish advice, doesn't it? It's making it social and involving other people in your behaviour change as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of dimension that we've lost as a society. We assume these are things we have to struggle with on our own. But I mean, is it Vegan January, or was it Vegan January, or something like that? I mean, my daughter got us trying to eat vegan food for January. We didn't. Fortunately, she disappeared, and we didn't have to sort of keep up the pretense for very long. But that gives it a sort of social aspect, so that it's a group of people, even if only implicitly a group doing the same thing together. And that is probably sort of trying to recover something that we've lost, because we've become such a sort of an individualistic society, whereas religious traditions do preserve something. And Ramadan is an excellent example at a high social level, making these sort of difficult commitments.
Yeah, I agree completely about the importance of the faith aspect. I mean, just when I was talking about little changes, for example, I usually do have counterexamples in my mind, and the big counterexample was major addictive behavior, or alcohol, for example. I mean, the Islamic tradition on that is pretty straightforward, which is just stop. And when the Prophet came, he said stop. And it's related that people were pouring their wine bottles into the street. Not that everyone really stopped forever, no, but a lot of people did stop. And basically, if Muslims, like other people, have come from a sort of, we have a range of levels of religious practice, but insofar as someone wants to take the religious teaching seriously, that's basically what they're confronted with. Well, stop, whether it's drugs, alcohol, etc. And a lot of people do. I'm not saying everyone this. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying it is something which is very powerful, and I've heard the same thing from Christians as well.
Yeah, but you're talking about a puritanical approach rather than the balance. See, so it's one thing to say we'll never get started. Right? Mm-hmm. This is forbidden, that's forbidden, that's forbidden. And then you don't have to implement much self-control.
Yeah, make your life easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of anyone who's combated alcoholism or something similar who takes a balanced approach and says, I'm just going to moderate it. And for most people, when it comes to addictive behavior, it's an all or nothing thing. I'm not saying everyone, that there's going to be exceptions, but I think balanced approaches are probably for the people who don't struggle with certain things. And even when it comes to alcohol, the Quran says there's some good and a lot of evil, and the evil is worse than the good, so basically don't drink it. And that's, obviously the Islamic perspective. But in any case, it may come across as puritanical. Islam has been accused of that. But I do think nonetheless the idea of responsibility to a higher power can do a lot to affect very lasting, permanent, and oftentimes sudden change in one's life. Motivation, at least, if nothing else.
Katy, you gave us a bit of a tease about your research on goals. Not to put you on the spot, but are there any that come to mind that might be useful that you just happen to have in your head that you can share with us?
Okay, so one of them was, yes, make it social and involve the people. I've got a little list of a few of them.
Yeah, so the research shows that involving
other people in your goals and making it more social. So it was interesting what you said about the Jewish tradition. Actually, so another really interesting thing that you said was the putting on black clothes and going where no one knows you. That's making it non-social, isn't it? Yeah. So rather than going down the pub with your friends, you have to...
It makes it not pleasurable anymore.
Exactly. So you're missing the social element, but also the other thing about that is it's making it inconvenient. Mm-hmm. And making inconvenient is like a really good way to, cut down or to stop doing something. And the way to make something, the way to do more of something is to make it more convenient. So if you combine your goals together, then that's one really good way of reaching two goals at once. So, for example, I run to the bank. I could drive to the bank and it would take probably 10 minutes less, but I choose to run to the bank because then I get to log 2 miles running, which adds up over the year, and I get my run in and I get to go to the bank, and it's not particularly inconvenient, and it's getting 2 goals in one. So another thing is I go for a run with my friends, so we get to chat, we get to go for a run, we enjoy ourselves. It's more enjoyable because it's more social, but also it's 2 goals in one. It's making sure you catch up with your friends, and it's
so if you run with your friend to the bank,
that's 3 goals. But so if your goals are conflicting, so I really want to see my friend, but I need to go for a run, then maybe the best thing is to go for a run with your friend, or a walk, or something along those lines. So that was one really good suggestion that I had. And
all these friends who want to go on runs.
Another thing was to increase the intrinsic motivation in that particular behaviour. So if you say, I hate going to the gym, I hear this all the time, people go, yeah, I don't do much exercise, I hate the gym. And you're like, why would you go to the gym? Gym's horrible, I hate the gym. So if you go for a nice walk, choose nice scenery, go with a friend, make it more pleasurable. If you don't like walking, do you like dancing? Lots of people love dancing. Dancing is excellent exercise. So from that perspective, I think making it more pleasurable is more likely to make it more pleasurable and more convenient are 2 really good ways of making sure that you keep up with it. So.
Isn't there a problem then that you don't feel like you've achieved anything then? If you made it pleasurable, it's not what's the point of making a New Year's resolution about it? It's too easy. Isn't there something that needs to be unpleasant and difficult in order to feel that you've made some sort of moral achievement?
Yeah,
otherwise, it's just been making life easy for yourself.
That's Lent.
Maybe that's right. You have to wait till then to really get something unpleasant.
Well, don't you feel like that's it?
I think a New Year's resolution can be pleasurable. I mean, it could be that make an effort to.
But isn't there something?
Read more books or something.
I just wonder if people don't feel they need to punish themselves with a New Year's resolution.
But maybe people are seeing it from wrong.
Sorry?
A sort of no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe that's the wrong way to look at it. Maybe if you want to actually achieve a resolution, then you need to say, okay, let's remove the pain, let's just have the gain. I mean, obviously, if you have a particular goal, then it probably will involve some pain. So, I mean, I've run half marathons, and they're never very nice, to be honest. But, I quite enjoy the training getting there. So, and there's this real sense of achievement. So you have that sense of achievement, which is also, a goal in itself.
What are the New Year resolutions you've done? Because mine are like things like, I'll keep the house a bit tidier, entertain a bit more.
Okay, so you're not
that sort of thing.
Yeah, but you're not tying it to a date or a time or
No,
how
like
often it's going
I
to
just
be.
want to change my life a bit more. That it's a bit neater around here. I can find my things when I'm looking. So have friends over. That goes with the neatness as well, and maybe encourage my children to do things more together or whatever. But honestly, I mean. I think it's a perspective, isn't it? A New Year resolution. It's like how you view your life as being better than it is currently. It's not all about looking glamorous.
No, definitely not. No, there's all kinds of resolutions people can make. Yes, I agree. Yeah, but if you make a resolution to have a tidier house, how do you measure that? How do you know when you've achieved that goal? How are you going to achieve it?
A bit more.
A bit more. How much is a bit more? So unless you actually, sit down and make a plan, then it's unlikely to happen. I'm afraid. I mean, maybe get a cleaner. That might help a bit.
I do agree that something that probably is a big how thing. Like for me personally, I read the famous book that probably everyone's read, The Japanese Art of Tidying, where she talks about that and says that a lot of people just put more effort into cleaning, but she actually gives different strategies. And when I read the book, that actually changed how I do things in terms of like my house and how I organize things and stuff. And it did actually, I can say on a practical level, it changed the level of tidiness or cleanliness, simply because it changed my thinking about how I was going to do it and gave me a concrete plan and concrete suggestions and concrete ideas that were workable in my life. Whereas before, if I just said that I thought this was a good idea and I didn't have a sort of a guidebook for how I was going to do it, then it didn't necessarily make it a change. Yeah.
I have to borrow the book from you.
It's a really good book. And I don't want to go off topic. I think that's what it's called, The Japanese Art of Tidying. Has anyone else read that?
Life-changing magic of tidying.
Oh, right, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying. Anyway, you can probably find it if you Google that.
It's interesting what prompts us to make these changes.
True,
I read somewhere that a tiny minority of people run every day, so now I run every day. I want to be in the tiny minority. And I saw a documentary on sugar and how awful it was, so I'm reducing the amount of sugar I eat every day. Yeah. It's bizarre.
But wouldn't you argue with all of these changes, there is some intrinsic benefit you feel, even though there might be some pain in the process? That's why we consider them something good. Like, let's say someone gives up sugar. You might be like losing out in the beginning because you don't have the enjoyable taste, but after a while you realize you feel better, you look better, you feel healthier, you're saving money, whatever it happens to be. So, or like I was saying about exercising, usually people feel good after they run or do some kind of exercise. So, or if it's to read more, again, it may be difficult, like starting up the discipline, but you feel better afterwards, or you see some improvement in your writing, or if you work in the academic world, improvement in your work or whatever. So all of these things are things that are intrinsically enjoyable insofar as they're positive. Wouldn't you agree? Because positive things are generally things that people on some level enjoy, even if it's not the surface level, and they'd rather just sit and watch TV.
I don't know, cutting down on sugar is totally miserable. I can't see the advantage of it at all, and it's making me realise that the only reason I ever want to eat is because I'm looking forward to sugar. That's what fundamentally nourishes me, and now that it's gone, I feel unhappy.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I addicted, and now I'm in decline in every sense.
Well, I think that's a very normal feeling, and sugar is known to be addictive. And I think there is a certain period you go through where you do feel like something's missing and you want to go back to it, and then it cuts out at a certain point, and then you feel better. And then you ask yourself at that point, do I feel better now or did I feel better before?
Good, yeah, looking forward to it.
Any final thoughts, ideas, suggestions, advice, or venting on how much, how frustrated you are about all the commitments you made and how wrong you are about that? Last ones? Alright. Well, I hope you all enjoyed and felt it was a useful hour or so.
It was great.
Actually, it was much, dare I say, it was much more interesting and stimulating than I think it was. Looking at the subject, it's actually interesting. But it's really engaging. So I'd like to thank myself, everybody, because you brought so many unusual perspectives. Something that looks that you don't really think about very often.
Yeah, we well done to 8 times for putting it together.
Yeah, well, I thought I did, but I guess there's more to do. But thank you to all of you. All the presenters who came, obviously did it, put in the time and effort and came here pro bono just out of the goodness of their hearts. So thank you to all of you for